Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Patricia McLaughlin, the General Manager for the Anthem Awards, and welcome to episode 3 of Trust Falls. And today we're speaking with the CEO of Sustainable Brands, Mike Dupee. So throughout this season, we're focused on answering the following question. How do we actually build the kind of trust that moves missions forward? And today, we're kind of zooming into the sustainability space with a bigger focus on how do we actually create trust in this new kind of greenhushing era. Now, today, I am really excited, as I mentioned, to be joined by Mike Dupee, CEO of Sustainable Brands.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, to kind of really jump right into things, I'm curious what inspired your journey into the sustainability space, and then how did you actually land at Sustainable Brands?
Yeah, my sustainability journey, it's kind of been without in a way being intentional about it as a young person. It's been the water I've been swimming in my whole career. I think it was driven initially by two sort of big things. One was I grew up in Vermont, so I was raised with a certain amount of respect for the natural environment. My dad was an avid sailor. We were fortunate to spend a lot of summer weekends and vacations sailing around Lake Champlain. And when you spend a lot of time in nature, I think you develop a certain relationship with the outdoors and with places, and you learn to care for them in a natural way, not an ideological way. And you learn to behave in certain ways that are fairly simple at first, like recycling at home, for example. And then secondly, my first real job out of college was at the former Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, which was a workplace, excuse me, where we were explicitly encouraged to bring our whole self to work. And for me, that ended up manifesting in kind of I didn't want to do things at work that I wouldn't do at home. And so recycling in the office, in the workplace at the time, this would have been the early 90s, was still kind of cutting edge, believe it or not. And I was like, I wouldn't do this at home. Why would I do it here at work? So I just started taking action, and that turned into a green team, and away we went. So fast forward a few years, I was at Green Mountain Coffee Roasters initially from 91 to 96, and I went back to school for a law degree and an MBA. And out of grad school, I became an investment banker. I was at Goldman Sachs for 4 years. I was in New York on 9/11. And like a lot of people, those events triggered a lot of self-reflection, which led me to decide it was time to get out of New York in the world of finance. And I came back to Green Mountain Coffee Roasters in a new role that it was called the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility. I think today we would probably call that a CSO role. And I held that role until 2012 through the acquisition of Keurig and the name change to become Keurig Green Mountain. Now, of course, it's Keurig Dr. Pepper, but I was also there in that role for the transformation of home coffee consumption through the introduction of single-serve Keurig brewers into homes. And in that role at that time, we were one of the early participants and members of the Sustainable Brands community. So I was drawn to the transformation orientation of Sustainable Brands. That was part of our corporate mission at GMCR. Explicitly, the mission was transforming the way the world understands business, one cup of coffee at a time. And transformation's always been something that moves me personally. From 2014 to 22, I was out of the corporate sustainability world, more or less. I was teaching in Vermont's Sustainable Innovation MBA program and launched an ecotourism startup. And in 2023, I was ready to come back into this world and had a number of conversations with Coanne Skrzyniars, who's the founder of Sustainable Brands. And through that, an opportunity arose for me to join the team in 2023 as COO. And then in 24, I stepped into the CEO role.
Awesome. And for anyone that's not familiar, can you actually share a little bit as to what Sustainable Brands is and the type of work that you guys do?
Yeah, you make me think of that quote that they say, Mark Twain. I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote a long one. I don't know if I can give you a short version, but I'll try. We're a learning, collaboration, and connection platform for business leaders and change agents focused at an intersection of three kind of functions: branding, marketing, sustainability, and then innovation and design. So our core value proposition is enhancing the ability of business to drive consumer and culture change globally by using their innovation and design skills to address important social and environmental challenges, and then leverage those achievements to drive business growth and services. So conventional corporate sustainability marketing might be more about, philanthropy and things we give back, or they might say we're such a good corporate citizen, that's why you should prefer our brand. In contrast, we try to build the capacity of businesses to embed social and environmental solutions in the way they design, develop, and market new products.
Gotcha. And so through the Anthem Awards this year, something that we're really kind of digging into and focusing in a little bit more on is the resilience of the impact sector and how that
Yep.
also kind of connects back to community overall. And Sustainable Brands has built an incredible community. I've been at some of your events in the past and have loved the group of people that you're able to bring together and some of the kindest individuals I think that I've ever come across. But you've created this amazing group, some of the brightest minds in CSR and sustainability, but what has led to that? And how have you guys been able to build such a powerful movement, resilient group over time?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words. That's a huge priority for us, and it's something we're proud of. So we tried to really architect a high trust, high action space. So I think I would highlight four contributors to that. One is we try hard to bring the whole system into the room, or as much of it at least as we can. We explicitly work to connect CMOs, CSOs, and innovators and the folks on their teams, so we can give people a chance to solve problems in kind of a 360-degree perspective. And whenever possible, we try to bring other voices into the room. So it could be other business perspectives beyond those three: operations or finance or HR, and then other stakeholders entirely, like regulators or academics or nonprofits. And we have a webinar coming up next week, July 1st, actually, on effective partnering between CMOs and CSOs to help build brand value. So it's just a great example of that dynamic. Secondly, we try to prioritize evidence and candor over ego. A lot of times, I think in the marketing field, marketing conferences or marketing oriented conferences can get pegged a little bit as boondoggles and a lot of flash and smoke. And we, as I say, we try to prioritize evidence and candor. All our member sessions follow Chatham House rules. And we try to emphasize that we can all learn as much from what didn't work as we can from what did. So real authentic conversations. High engagement is a big part of it. We work hard to provide lots of touch points for our community to engage with us. There's in-person events and webinars and member learning circles and peer cohorts and research reports and custom design tools that are available for our members to work on with us. So lots of opportunities for people to figure out what works for them and pull that to themselves. But at the end of the day, I think it's shared purpose that has driven it. Ultimately, this community's convened for 20 years around a single ambition, which has been about redefining the role of brands in a regenerative economy. And a deep sense of community has arisen from that shared commitment and the shared vision. Our members have the opportunity to really get to know one another, as you referenced. They support one another, they cheer for one another, and they really value that highly. I would say our community is every bit as relational as it is or can be transactional. And that's a big difference for us.
Awesome. And obviously right now too, I think that community is even more important as we're kind of in this transition period of sorts, I would say. And so I feel like for the past decade, we've been on a little bit of a high with some of this work and a lot more people getting involved and trying to figure out ways to just elevate sustainability work. Obviously, greenwashing became another trend alongside that and has been a bit of the hot topic of what to avoid and how do you just be truthful in your work. And now we're kind of seeing the opposite happening, where instead of people are kind of overpromising, they're just not saying anything. And this new idea of greenhushing has kind of risen. But I'm curious, from your space and what you're seeing, what does this kind of phrase of greenhushing mean to you, and how is it starting to impact some of your work, if it is?
Yeah, well, greenhushing has been around, the term and arguably the behavior has been around for a long time. I think greenwashing, the phrase, has been around since like the 80s, but it used to just be when a company didn't know how to talk about what they did or they didn't prioritize it. When I was getting started in the field in the 90s, it was so common to hear businesses say everything we do around sustainability is our best kept secret, and it's so frustrating. We want to tell that story and we don't know how. So greenhushing is a riff on greenwashing, and there's a really interesting, informative piece. Planettracker.org has a piece called The Greenwashing Hydra that unpacks, I think it's 6 different tactical variants on greenwashing, including greenhushing. So it can manifest itself in lots of different ways. But at the end of the day, greenhushing, it's the defensive silence that creeps in when brands are afraid to say anything because they think it'll be used against them. And it is absolutely showing up in our work. So how do you, as a business, how do you talk about your purpose, your commitments, your projects? This is one of the biggest communication challenges for businesses in the US right now, no question. So we see tons of demand for research and discussion on this topic. In parallel, we're also seeing a rising demand for, I'll just say, safe space peer exchanges, places where you can close the door, where press might not be there, where you've got the shared community, you have each other's back, so you can talk openly and candidly. And then a greater interest in how to quantify the return on a company's sustainability investments. Instead of just talking about it qualitatively, how do you talk about it more quantitatively? Because we can see that with in Europe in particular, the rise of regulation that's going to demand that you can document and verify the claims that you're making in order to defend yourself against that backlash. So we've actually created a masterclass web series on the ROI of sustainability topic. We had our first session in May and over 2,000 people signed up for it. We're going to run that series out through the summer and then culminate it in our conference in October. So tons of tons of interest in that topic, return, and how to quantitatively talk about it. But I think the question, how has greenhushing affected our work? How are corporations thinking about it? I think there's some subtlety in there that's worth exploring. At least, I guess I'd call it. We can bifurcate between how or when a company talks about their work versus whether or not they remain committed to the work. Right. So just because you're not talking about it doesn't necessarily mean you're abandoning it. We've certainly seen in recent months a dramatic change in language, but I'm not sure if the retreat on commitment has been as dramatic. And a lot of press, a lot of the public discourse is assuming that they're going hand in hand. So as one example, Nancy Levine Stearns from the New York Times, she's been very active on LinkedIn, posting updates when the big corporations have their annual meetings and the anti-DEI resolutions get surfaced. And they're overwhelmingly getting defeated, and by a lot, 98% to 2%, 99% to 1, are just getting pulled entirely. Sustainabilitymag.com's got a really powerful graphic showing about 30 of these big corporations. This is like Amazon and Apple and Walmart. These are the big players. And there's 3 that are still TBA, but right now the anti-DEA proxies their batting average is pretty bad. Now, I don't share that to minimize the impact in situations where companies have scaled back investments or even outright dismantled programs. That is happening, but I share it just to provide some hope and a reality check that reports of the death of sustainable businesses or the death of purpose-led corporations, I'd say those are incredibly premature.
No, I think that's really good to hear, and I feel like so much of it is just more of a what do now more than anything else, where people are just coming back to the drawing board and trying to figure out how they want to talk about some of this work in the new era. But I'm curious as well, kind of for maybe younger companies or organizations or people that are just a little behind on the trend that are now trying to move into speaking about their sustainability in more broad ways, or are maybe looking into what it could be to be a B Corp or something like that. How can, during this moment of pullback, can we encourage leaders and stakeholders to continue to want to get on board and implement some of these practices and efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. The evidence, we recently convened a 3-day summit, Brands for Good, Catalyzing Culture Change. And we return to this topic over and over, that sometimes silence can make sense, right? If you're piloting a project, you want to test it out. We've all heard of like soft openings at a restaurant. Let's not let everybody know till we feel good about that we know what we're doing. But at this summit we convened, this topic of the the downside of not communicating came up over and over. And I'll just shell out. I prepared some notes here on all these different statistics. So Axios says that 70% of people already think business leaders, quote, deliberately mislead them. So we've already got a trust gap, and remaining silent is just going to widen that gap. Morning Consult, a business intelligence agency, tells us 76% of Gen Z women research a brand's values before buying. That runs counter to what we hear a lot in the public discourse, that nobody has time to do this research anymore. Not true. ESG firm Revolt has a research piece where they talk of, it's called poking the bear. So they liken communicating in this environment to poking a bear, and to just play the metaphor, they tell us that hibernation's not an option. 58% of U.S. consumers prefer it when a brand advocates for issues that matter to me as the consumer, and to them, the company. Suzanne Shelton at ERM Shelton does a ton of research on this. 90% of global consumers say a company's environmental reputation has an impact on their purchasing decisions, and that's 86% for social. 75% want to be seen as someone who buys and uses eco-friendly products. 85% agree that global warming is occurring and it's primarily due to human activity. 76% hold companies responsible to make changes that are going to help address this. 83% believe companies should bear responsibility for the end-of-life disposal of their products. So Suzanne ties it all together to say, so given that people care about these issues, they hold companies responsible, they want to buy from sustainable companies, and they view the good ones as the ones that address ESG issues, and they want to know what they're doing to solve the climate crisis, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball if you aren't not only doing this work, but talking about it. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the logic is when you really look at the data for not doing this work and not talking about it.
No, it really is something where it's just like the proof is in the pudding, and it's taken a little while to get all of this research together, I would say, but I feel like it's things that we have felt for a while, but it's helpful to kind of have a lot of these numbers coming out around these consumer trends and just what people are really caring about and looking for.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to trust. And we've already talked about that a little bit, but what is the best way for brands to be building trust with their community and consumers around their sustainability efforts at this time? And obviously communication is one thing, but we still want to kind of avoid teetering into the degree of greenwashing. But where is that like perfect place for people to be talking about this work?
Yeah, well, let me just challenge the question a little bit, that there's probably no one perfect place. There's no one size fits all, other than silence. Silence is probably not your best option. So the first piece, the first, I think, response I'd say is the Shakespearean maxim, know thyself. There's a piece of research that I came across last year that was asking people across the political spectrum, what companies do you see as most political versus least political? And the two that came in number one and number two were Patagonia and Chick-fil-A, which is sort of jaw-dropping, right? Because they're sort of the darlings of each side of the aisle. Why would they be considered to be not political? And the logic was that they know who they are and you know who they are. You should not be surprised by anything that either of those companies does, because they're very open about it and they have been forever. And so that's not political. That's just who they are. They know who they are and they show up as who they are. So know yourself first, and move into this space from a foundation of authenticity. Don't do it to capitalize on trends, first of all. So know yourself. Secondly, transparency is a big part of it. Sharing your plan ahead of time, where you're at today, what you don't know, what you're trying to achieve, and then sharing updates as you move through that process. Both things that go well and the gaps will serve you very well. I think communicating what you didn't get right helps build trust and build authenticity and disarms the skepticism. And Edelman's done some research that tells us vulnerability, if you will, that's another way to signal authentic intent, and is a stronger driver of trust than actual competence. So transparency, finding your comfort level with transparency matters. You can consider using third-party verification. That always helps build credibility. Participatory storytelling is another tactic, bring consumers along. I remember years ago, Aman Singh, who's now with Kenview, was invited as a journalist as a company she was invited in to sit at the design table as they were designing their green certified line. And they just let her sit there and listen in and write articles about it. They brought her along. I thought it was brilliant. So I think I'd stop there in general. I would also, though, I would share with everyone, encourage you to come to our Sustainable Brands or to BBMG or GlobeScan to look for a report that they just put out called From Anxiety to Agency. It isn't necessarily applicable to everybody or every demographic. It's specifically focused on the deep anxiety and really the overwhelm that today's Gen Z is experiencing. I think we've seen a trend in recent years. The younger generations are just more and more open to this stuff and supportive of these sustainability initiatives. And we're seeing a big change with the Gen Z folks. 77% are inactive or indifferent to sustainable behaviors. 80% acknowledge that they're personally affected by climate change, but their engagement is declining. 60% are very worried, but 42% feel powerless to act, and 77% feel disconnected from sustainability messaging. So they know there's a problem and they just don't feel agency. They don't trust the institutions that are out there. And so GlobeScan and BBMG then said, well, what might we do to address that? And they came up with 5 recommendations. The number one was lead with the truth. You got to start with the truth, because people they'll smell the inauthenticity right out of the gate if they think you're blowing smoke at them. They've got 4 other: make power personal, create connection loops, invite joy, and weave new stories. We don't have time to get into those, but a very, really powerful way to think about connecting with a generation that appears to be increasingly disillusioned. And I think requires some trust to be built before they're even going to listen to you. And I think there's some really great lessons there for marketing communications beyond just Gen Z.
Yeah, and diving a little bit more into the idea of just the role that storytelling plays in all of this. I'm curious where you see that kind of falling in this kind of hierarchy of importance, and also if there are any brands and organizations that are just doing this really well.
Yeah, well, storytelling is, I feel like it gets beaten to death, and I don't want to go in that direction and spend a lot of time emphasizing something I imagine most of the audience probably knows. That storytelling works. You need to be a good storyteller, but it works. Perhaps for me anyway, I'm going to date myself because this has been around for a long time, but the Footprint Chronicles with Patagonia was one of the early examples of really great storytelling. You can also see it. I spent, as I mentioned, a lot of my time in the coffee industry. And so telling stories that connect people who are consuming coffee with the faces and the names and the stories of the people on the ground who grow it. A lot of coffee companies have spent time on that. Yerba Madre does a really great job at that. So there's no question, making it real, making it contextual, giving people someone to cheer for, someone to connect with through storytelling is going to have a really powerful impact.
And as we kind of thinking about being upfront and creating that truth and being vulnerable a little bit too, how have you seen companies handle and also audience react to sometimes having some setbacks around some sustainability work, or also when we don't necessarily reach some of our goals? I mean, I know coming from a background more in fundraising that's never fun when we're hitting like a midway point of a campaign. We need to be updating the group and it's just not there, and it's really hard. But how have you seen this play out?
Yeah, this is a place where I think sustainability comms differs perhaps from other kinds of comms. And from my experience, it was mostly contrasting sustainability communications with investor relations communications. So if you're going to put out communications that are going to investors, you are going to be so over the top sure about what you're saying, right? You're not going to take any chances because of all the potential risk that comes with that from lawsuits and things like that. The increasing regulation that's coming may start to bring some of that into play with sustainability comms. But at least up until now, I think there's an opportunity to get more traction, build more trust by communicating your mistakes. So you start with being transparent and authentic, but when there are failures, you own them and acknowledge them, and then learn from them. Show your stakeholders how you're thinking about it, how you're processing it, and how you're learning from it to drive better outcomes. One example, back to our Brands for Good Catalyzing Culture Change Summit, Champagne Graves from Boldify was on. She was talking about the role women are playing in this marketplace, and she shared an example of a sustainability oriented communication that was just just bad. It was inauthentic. It was untrue. And she shared an influencer on TikTok who just eviscerated this particular piece of communication. And I said, okay, that was super entertaining. Do you have an example of somebody who's actually gotten that kind of feedback and handled it well? And she referenced and I believe it was an apparel brand in the UK that told a great story. They did have a great story, and they meant it. And then someone discovered something in one of their factories, called them out on it, and this brand reacted by saying, "Wow, we got to go find out more about that." And then they came back and relayed to their consumers, you know what, you're right. They lied to us, and they lied to a whole bunch of other people. And now here's what we're doing to address that. We've now fixed this problem. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. That was the kind of jujitsu pivot on it. And I think you build so much, I don't know, relationship capital, brand capital with your consumers, right? I mean, it's like when your kids finally realize that when they get in trouble, they should tell you before you hear about it from the people at school. And you're like, oh, okay, now we can deal with this. Now I can trust you better. So there's a lot of potential to build trust and build credibility, build capital with your audience by acknowledging when things don't go wrong. But it starts at the very beginning, as I mentioned before, spelling out what you're trying to achieve, where you're at, what you don't know, and then bringing your consumers along for the ride. The risk gets higher here, because if you do set yourself up, if you do create kind of a high profile initiative, then the standards are going to be the expectations going to be very high for you to communicate when things go wrong. And there's a number of interesting places on the web where you can find articles of, top 10 sustainability fails, where people have tried to dodge accountability or tried to sort of, say, oh, look over here, don't look over there. And it just never works out very well.
Gotcha. And I think a question kind of for the Anthem audience, I would say, is we have a lot of smaller organizations, agencies, very small nonprofits, and organizations that aren't necessarily set up to have someone in a CSO role. But if someone's thinking about how can we actually take this first step, start operating a little bit more sustainably. Wow.
Right.
Words are hard. But also just have a lot more intention behind some of their practices or some of the ways that they bring in materials and the vendors they work with. Do you have a little bit of advice as to what that first step should be and how organizations can get into this?
Yeah, for sure. I know I'm repeating this one again, but know thyself. So have a sense of who you are, what you're about. Don't just follow the latest pretty butterfly that goes past your window. There's a ton of free toolkits out there that aren't designed with your business in mind, but they are useful to help you think about the kinds of questions you should answer. AI can be an incredible help there, because it'll synthesize what's out there in the world and help you think about that. Additionally, there are more and more in the last few years, there are fractional CSO or CSO-like resources. So if you are ready to dig into that and want want somebody with experience to advise you, but you can't afford a full-time person. There are options out there to get really high quality help for 5 hours a week, 10 hours a month, something like that. But where you would start is with materiality, right? Try to focus on what matters to your business and what you can actually have an impact on. Map a few hotspots you think you can influence, and then experiment. Try something. Small wins, share it. All of that's going to build your muscle internally in the business. It's going to build enthusiasm. It's going to build credibility, and see where it leads you. I think it's a huge opportunity. Similar to how a sustainability failure might be viewed as a really negative opportunity, but there's ways to turn it into a trust building. Similarly, when you're small, you think, well, what difference can I make? You can flip that around and say you actually have the better opportunity, right? You don't have to re-engineer an entire, $1 billion business. You get to build it from scratch. You are more agile. Your investments are smaller. They're a big deal to you as a small business person, but you're able to pivot and change things when you're early. Building this in at the beginning is easy. Requires intelligence, requires courage, but it's a lot easier than trying to turn the Titanic as you're heading towards the iceberg. And I think there's an interesting how do I put it? Like the world as all of these trends we've discussed. Well, we haven't actually spent a lot of time talking about all of the bad news, right? About environmental ecosystems under pressure and social inequities. But as all these trends continue to go the direction we think they're going, bigger brands are going to become more and more aware and wary of these smaller and more agile brands that are able to meet customers where they are. Typically, they will see these smaller brands as acquisition opportunities, and they'll often say the right words about, we're going to bring brand whatever in and learn from them, but they're usually pretty reluctant to mess around very much with their big mainstream legacy brands. I think as these challenges intensify and reality frankly becomes more and more difficult, they're going to have to adapt more significantly and more quickly, and the smaller brands are going to be the teachers and the leaders, and now's the time to start preparing for it. So I think there's a lot of free, low-cost resources out there, and the most important thing is to start.
Awesome. And I think an important question here too, and where we always like to bring the conversation, is what's giving you hope at this point in time for this work and for the future of sustainability?
Yeah. Here's another potential. You can look at this negatively, but to me, it's a positive. I think as a global society, as the global economy, we've painted ourselves, and maybe this is a U.S. centric view, but we've painted ourselves into a corner, and the only way out is through. Consumers more and more care about it. Demand for premium green products continues to grow, even in inflationary environments. There's all kinds of evidence for that. We know greenhushing and greenwashing harms your business. We know regulators are going to punish lazy and inaccurate comms. We know that the environmental, social pressures are ramping up. We know business is an agent for change. The only way through this is to get it right and dig in and embed this in your business. It can't just be philanthropy. You have to approach it the way, like Procter & Gamble is a great example. They call it performance plus. They're never going to skimp on product quality, but they're investing tons in figuring out how they can contribute to water smart homes and transitioning away from big jugs of liquid and then down to pods, and now they've got technology that takes laundry detergent and I don't know what the right verb is, but transforms it into fibers. So instead of pods, now you've got things that look like your dryer sheets, and so you're going to be able to they'll save a ton on transportation and fuel and emissions and things like that. They're building it into their business. That is the path out here, and the options for delaying, we're running out of them. Not only with respect to the planetary systems, but to be successful in business, consumers are ready for this. So That's, to me, is a hopeful thing. There's one path through. Let's all acknowledge what it is, and let's go run through it. Related, and secondly, we already know how to do what we need to do. What we've lacked is really the political capital and a strong consumer push behind it, and that is starting to materialize as well. Um, and the momentum is there. Every cycle we go through, we're getting a broader and more diverse set of brands and individuals engaged. So I think the future is bright. It can feel dark and ominous right now, um, but I think we're headed in the right direction for sure.
Awesome. And I have two more questions for you, Mike, but I do just want to give a heads up to the audience that we're getting towards the end here. So if there are any questions kind of coming to your mind as we've been chatting here, please start throwing them into the comments and into the chat, and we can get to those once we kind of wrap up. But another call out is that I know that Sustainable Brands has its flagship event coming up in October, and I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what people can expect from SB25 in San Diego.
Yeah, our theme is adapt and accelerate, which hopefully that will make sense given everything you've heard me say today. It feels ominous, feels dark right now, so let's adapt to it. But let's keep at it. Let's keep the faith steady on here, and let's see if we can accelerate. Let's go faster with the change that we need. We're going to have some great speakers in plenary. We've got Ellen Jakowski from MasterCard, Andrew Winston, Nita Bockert from Nestle Purina. We've got 5 different tracks on selling sustainability, enabling behavior change, transforming materials and supply chains, catalyzing innovation and regenerative design, and then governance and metrics for ROI and impact. And then the event is not all plenary. It's layered with tons of networking opportunities, a bunch of workshops on improving packaging and enlisting consumers to help lead your sustainability programs. I mentioned earlier the ROI of sustainability series is going to culminate there. There's going to be lots of consumer research. We'll be talking about how to make the business case for DEI, molecular accounting, right? A new lens on sustainable impact. We've got 2 immersive summits, one on adaptation and resilience and another on regen ag. So there's a ton of really great content coming for folks that come and join us in October.
Awesome. I know I'm very excited for that. And finally, where can everyone go to actually learn more about Sustainable Brands, maybe follow you, follow the organization?
Yeah, for sure. So sustainablebrands.com. I imagine anyone could have figured that out on their own, but that's the URL. All of our event info, our research hub. We've got a ton of, we've got 20 years of historical content, right? Articles and videos and audio feeds and such. A lot of it is available at no cost. You just have to register on the website to get access. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. There really is a jaw-dropping amount of content available. We're on LinkedIn at Sustainable Brands, and then I'm also there at Michael Dupee. And we've got a newsletter that folks can sign up for as well, our SB Insights newsletter. So lots of opportunities to plug in.
Awesome. And it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat quite yet. A little bit of love, which we always love to see. But I think generally, Mike, I do just want to thank you so much for having this conversation today. I know for myself, it just kind of recenters you as to what's important, where we can focus our time and our best efforts and forward to within this space. And generally, I think across impact, a lot of similar themes.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. You know, I guess that maybe one piece I would add, we talked mostly about the risk of not doing this work from a consumer perspective, right, and staying silent. And where we didn't necessarily spend a lot of time is all the upside. And I might just leave folks with that. I mean, we've talked about the risk of saying nothing, but I mentioned that there's research, NYU Stern Center for Responsible Business and PwC both have research that show not only do prices, not only do sustainable products gain market share, they're also commanding price premiums even in inflationary markets. So you have pricing power. You're going to have regulators coming at you. This is the idea of how do you think about building support internally? How do you message maybe to the C-suite about it? So there's opportunities for price premiums. You're going to have regulatory tailwinds that you're going to need to be paying attention to. You can consider framing the work as a hedge in support of business model resilience, right? There's a ton of businesses with factories in California that have either been on fire or underwater the last few years, and people are paying attention to that. You don't want to lag behind your competitors. You want to consider the cost of recruiting and retention. And then lastly, Andrew Winston is very articulate in admonishing corporates to treat sustainability like they treat every other discipline, in the way that they demand evidence for why they should invest on it. I think the most compelling one he puts out there is people say we're reluctant to invest in sustainability because we're not sure what we're going to get, and yet those same people are spending billions on AI, and if you ask them, do you know what you're going to get, the answer is no.
Yeah.
So there's also a lot of really positive reasons to do this. It's not just risk reduction, risk avoidance.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to kind of leave things on today. But I think, again, thank you so much for being here. And I also want to add some final notes here. Remind everyone that the final entry deadline for the 5th Annual Anthem Awards is coming up in just about a month on August 1st. So if anyone has any questions about entering or getting more involved in the Anthem Awards community, please let me know. And as we mentioned, you can also register for SB25 in San Diego on the Sustainable Brands website, and again, have some additional information in the chat for how you can register with our Anthem Awards discount code. But Mike, thank you so much for being here and for just sharing some wonderful insights with us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining.